more people than I ever dreamed would show up. So thanks for that. Um, my name is Mark Berton, and I wrote Aroughcoune. It was my COVID project. Um, we had a lot of free time on our hands, and it's a horror science fiction thriller set in Western Pennsylvania. It was released almost a year ago to the day, February 19th of last year. Um, I've been writing all my life, and I was a journalist with the Pittsburgh Tribune Review for 4 years. I covered zoning and planning issues mainly, but I also got an award in medical and science writing from the Society of Professional Journalists. After that, I went into corporate public relations for a nonprofit. I was a communications director for the Animal Rescue League for 4 years, and that was probably the toughest job. If you're an animal lover, it was probably the toughest job I've had. And then after that, for 14 years, I worked um, for a magazine publishing company, and I was managing editor there. Um, and we saw that magazine company grow from 3 titles all the way to, I think there's 22 now. But COVID changed all that, and I left that job, and we worked from home a lot during that time. And while I was working from home, I had the once in a lifetime opportunity to spend the day with my daughter every day and help guide her through her second grade year. Everything was virtual. They didn't have school at that time. Um, so I listened in to what she was learning and what they were doing, and I would help her with her homework. And then after her day was over, right around lunchtime, the school day was way condensed back then. Uh, then I did my job for the magazines. And I started kicking around this idea for this book. And I wanted to incorporate some of what she was learning, some of the STEM information, the science, technology, engineering, mathematics that she was learning in even at that second grade level. Um, so it was different. It was a departure for me. Previously, I'd written these types of books. One was on Dixmont State Hospital, which is up Route 65 in Kilbuck Township, and another one was on Moon Township. And while they were good books to write, they weren't exactly what I wanted to do with writing. So got those out of the way, kind of went into hiatus with my personal writing for a number of years. But a lot of Dixmont is inside Aroughcoune. There's certain chapters that deal with a mental institution called Graff State, and everything that's described in the book about Graff State came from Dixmont in the time I spent there. I had pretty much unfettered access to the property, 407 acres, and it was all urban exploration type of stuff. And I just took photo after photo after photo. Eventually, the buildings were raised. They were supposed to put a Walmart on that site, and it ended up. If you're local, you might remember there was a giant landslide that covered Route 65 for about a year. So that was where that hospital was. The core story about Aroughcoune revolves around a giant mutated rabid raccoon. And it sounds crazy, and it is crazy. I shopped the idea around the agents and publishers for almost well over 2 years. And I was about to give up, and I was about to just either put it on the shelf or just self-publish it, just put it out there. But then I found a Facebook post for this little tiny publishing company in England, and they were called Roswell Publications, Roswell Publishing, and their niche was weird fiction. I said, this is pretty weird. So I sent her an email, and I said, hey, I got this book. And I said, are you open to submissions right now? And she said, yeah, I'm recuperating from back surgery, and I have some time on my hands. I haven't put the open for submissions up on the website, so it's a good time. I don't have a big workload right now. She said, but send me what you have. So I sent it to her. She got back to me fairly quickly, and she said, I love it. And she said, I want to publish it. So I said, that's great. Um, I said, what do you think it is? And she said, I think it's young adult. So I said, I'm in America with our puritanical backgrounds that we all share over here, and this would not be young adult in our markets. There's some profanity, there's some graphic violence, not a lot, but it's definitely PG-13 and up, if you had to rate it. She said, well, I'm in England, it's young adult. I said, okay. Um, I picked the raccoon because they're highly intelligent. They have 5 fingers, but they don't have a thumb. So they just have 5 fingers. So they can manipulate objects fairly easily. They can solve puzzles. They remember things for years. They're perfect animal to kind of scale up and become monstrous. My background growing up, I was always a fan of Godzilla. I still am. Any Godzilla movie that's on, we'll watch. I'll watch. Um, and X Files. I was a huge X Files fan. So anything conspiracy related, government conspiracy was right in my wheelhouse. And I had all these components floating around in my head, and I thought raccoon's gonna be a hard sell, but it actually makes sense. And I'll explain a little bit more about that when we get to a passage to read. Um, so in this book, raccoons were basically a base model for military weapons um, engineering. The thought was to make like a super soldier type of program using larger size raccoons. But with anything science based, science fiction based, something always goes wrong. You're not dealing with exact genetics like you are in today's world. So they were dealing with um, old time genetics, crossbreeding, things like that. And they were able to isolate size on the genome, but they weren't able to pinpoint it like they can with CRISPR today. So they scaled this beast up. It became the size of a small house, and it went on a rampage. It escaped the lab. It was in Plum Island, which is off the coast of New York, and it made its way all the way down through New York to Pennsylvania, and it finally settled in our setting here in Western Pennsylvania, where the story takes place. You, I found out, you can get rabies if you eat rabid vector species animals. You don't always have to be bitten. So that's where this thing picks up rabies along the way. It it is carnivorous. It's a trash panda, so it eats what it finds. And it ate something rabid, another rabid raccoon along the way, and that's what gives it rabies. Now the science in the book, my 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 benchmark was to keep everything what I call mythbusters plausible. So yeah, it can go to the fringe a little bit, but everything can be done. Um, Picking up rabies from carrion, that was based on a study out of the University of Kansas. Um, all the things that are built in the book, our protagonists, our heroes, they use ham radios, they use hubcaps, they use ATVs and solar panels, things that were found in the state park where this takes place in a ranger station. And they were able to reconfigure all these things and kind of MacGyver stuff together um, to solve their problems, to get out of the predicaments that they're in. Plum Island, like I said, off the coast of New York, was an actual foot and mouth laboratory when we had an outbreak in this country of foot and mouth disease. But it was also isolated enough that it's easy to build a conspiracy theory out of it. The um, the characters in the book are pretty diverse. We have two teenage kids who are just going out to Algonquin State Park for a weekend, just a camping trip getaway. The ranger is a woman named Monique McKesson, and she's a 20-something um, young black woman who oversees this park. We have another character named Slaughter, who is another game warden who followed the creature all the way down from Connecticut, where his state park was located, to Western Pennsylvania. And he's kind of like the linchpin and brings the lore into the characters in Pennsylvania, gives them the backstory. And then we have Minion Jones, and Minion is a Native American um, who lives in Algonquin State Park. He has a grandfather clause there. Grandfather clause is if you have a house existing somewhere in the state park or on a piece of property, and the state comes in and says, we're going to take this property, well, they may let one or two houses or uses remain in that little zoning area. So he was grandfathered in. He's the last of his family. He has a whole backstory, but he's also an herbalist, and he also grows medicinal marijuana. So he has a nickname of Moon Thunder, and he sells it to the college kids, and that's how he makes his living. Now, the geography, I had to fudge a little bit. If you're familiar with the area, there's parts of this park that are McConnell's Mills, parts that are Raccoon State, there's parts that are State College, but I had to condense all that to make the story work. So when I talk about college kids, I'm thinking Penn State, even though the park doesn't expand to those boundaries. Minion is an interesting character to me personally because he brings a lot of Native American lore into the story. Everything that he talks about, uh, all the mythology that he talks about, it's all out there, and you can find it and read up on it. It wasn't invented by me, and I wanted to make sure that I represented it properly and didn't make up my own Native American lore, because I wanted to respect the source material and kind of highlight it and let people know that it's out there. It's fascinating stuff, and if you track it down, they have stories of creation, they have stories of why we have weather, why we have certain seasons, why things happen. These are all based on their pantheon of gods and spiritual creatures that make the whole world work. So he sees this whole story unfolding through his lens. Monique is kind of your small town girl. She grew up in Oakdale. When I was growing up, Oakdale was, like all of Western Pennsylvania, a fairly racist place. And so she had to combat that strife growing up and deal with the fallout from that. She was probably the hardest character to write because I'm not a woman. I don't claim to know what a woman goes through on a daily basis. So it's very difficult to write something that you're not familiar with. But I did want to put in her qualities that I hope my daughter has one day: tenacity, strength, uh, intelligence. So she's my hopes, my aspirations for what I want my daughter to grow up to be. And then everybody else is different facets of my personality just broken out. So the story evolves. It's not all horror. I think some parts are humorous. I think some parts are introspective. But the reviews say it's a fun read, and that's kind of what I was going for, to tell a good story that people could follow easily and enjoy. Um, Putting it together was a little bit difficult because I'm a newspaper writer. I was trained to be a newspaper writer, so I rely heavily on dialogue. So I don't outline, and all my college and high school teachers would be mortified that I announce that in public. But I don't write outlines. I let this story grow organically, and I let it go in the direction I feel it needs to go in. When you do that, you could write pages and pages, chapters that you just have to scrap afterwards because you paint your characters into a corner that's physically impossible to escape. And I didn't want that to happen. I didn't want a Deus Ex Machinus, machine to come down and save everybody at the last minute. I wanted them to figure it out because everybody has their own problems, and we have to all figure that out. We have to figure out what works best for us and what works in our particular situation. And with this book, I wanted these characters to work it out, to figure it out, to escape on their own, using their own intellect and their own devices, to use what they bring to this challenge, to meet this challenge and overcome it. So I did paint myself into a lot of corners that wasted a lot of time and wasted a lot of, not ink, or pixels. So, um, but in the end, I think it's worth it because when you explore your writing that way, it makes you think harder about it, and you really force yourself to come up with something plausible for these characters to escape and get out of their situation with. There's a scene where little Bill, um, he's kind of like he's not a total jock, like not a football team kind of kid, but he's definitely like plays some pickup basketball here and there. He goes into battle with this 15-foot raccoon, and he creates a spear out of Nembatol, which is what people in the animal industry use to put to sleep. We used to call it blue juice at the shelter. But Nembatol is basically something you use to euthanize animals. And he finds himself in the ranger station, and they have this Nembatol there with these giant syringes, and they also have these giant poles because if you have a rabid animal or an animal that's fighting you, even non-rabid raccoons, they used to bring them into the shelter all the time. They are fierce, and they have these poles where they put them around their neck and they hold them down um, so that they can be euthanized. And even on the pole, they can't escape. They're still really kind of scary. So he finds this pole with his Nematol, and he creates this armor out of an ATV hubcap, and he goes after them trying to save his friends. And I don't, spoiler alert, he does save them, but these are things that the character had to think through, that I had to think through, that I had to kind of do the math. how much Neanderthal do you need to put down a 15-foot raccoon? I don't think that question's been asked to Google that often. So I had to deal with horses and how much do you need to put down a horse, and then I just scaled that up and multiplied it out. So that's an example of how the science really matters in telling a story that's believable. And then I have a cleanup crew, which are basically, you can call them the Men in Black. Um, I refer to them in the book as Al1, as in cleanup on Al1. And they're the team that comes in at the end and they kind of put all the pieces together for the characters and kind of make the conspiracy go away, kind of make the whole incident smoothed over. They are the ones that work for the government and kind of pull the strings and release all that black book funding that you always read about in the Tom Clancy novels and things like that. So they that's the book in a nutshell. I have an excerpt that I can read for you just to kind of give you a little taste of what's in there. I am working on a sequel now. I don't believe in, Aroughcoune Part 2. So I do bring back some of these characters because now that I have this world and these people that I created, it's a lot easier to kind of pick them up and put them in different situations. So the sequel is going to be a lot darker. My goal is to not be a British young adult author, and I'm not ashamed of that. But I kind of want like American street cred, and so it's a lot darker. It's a lot more graphic in the violence. It's a lot more supernatural, and so it's about 3/4 of the way done. So this time next year, maybe we can all come back and celebrate that. But so this is a scene from the very beginning. This has Slaughter, the guy that followed it all the way down from Connecticut, Zinn and Bill. And it starts off with Slaughter. He kind of gave them a story about who he was. He told him that in the beginning, when they first come across him, he told them that he was the warden for the state park that they were in. And he just gave them a story. Then later on, they find out that Monique is actually the warden for Algonquin State Park. And so he's kind of sketchy, unreliable, and he has told them a story. So they're kind of leery of believing anything that he has to say. So this is the origin of the monster. This is them at their campsite, and this is him starting off. Look, I'm not the warden. I was one, and I wanted to give you boys a warning. When it gets dark, stay in your tent no matter what you hear, he said. You two picked a hell of a weekend to come up here. Why, are you going to go on a killing spree or something, Zinn said. That doesn't matter. If you stay in your tent, it doesn't matter if you stay in your tent. It's a long story and you wouldn't believe me if I told you, so let's just keep it simple. You're going to hear some loud noises. You won't know what they are. Stay inside and it won't get you. What won't get us, Zinn said. Well, I don't have a name for it, Slaughter said. It's a creature of some kind. And I was told not to swear, so I'm just going to BS, Bill said. Effing rob us already and get out of here. I'm not here for your things. I'm not here for anything other than the creature. I followed it here. Been studying it for quite some time now. I guess maybe since 1977 or so. It was beginning to dawn on Zinn that this man was a lunatic. Maybe he got on the wrong bus and rode it to the end of the line and just kept walking. But there was a focus, a cogence to him that didn't seem entirely crazy. Okay, so what is it? Slaughter sat up straight, pulled his legs in, and crossed them on the ground. You asked for it. Sit down, Slaughter said. I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version, because we only have about 2 hours before the sun's down completely, and I need to be in position before then. Bill and Zinn sat down opposite Slaughter. Can you toss us a couple waters? Cooler's in the tent, Zinn said. Oh, sure, Slaughter said. He got up, ducked into the tent, and came out with 2 bottles of Poland Spring. handed them to the boys before sitting back down cross-legged again. My name is Doug Slaughter, and I'm from Griswold, Connecticut. I was the warden for Pochog State Forest, which is about an hour and a half outside of New Haven. I worked there for 7 or 8 years before hitting the road following this thing, Slaughter said. You guys ever hear Plum Island? They both shook their heads no. Okay. Plum Island is across the Block Island Sound, and it's in New York State. Geographically, it's about as close to the Connecticut and Rhode Island borders as you can get. It's isolated, and it was the perfect place for biological research. In the 1950s, it became a research center for foot and mouth disease after several outbreaks. And, like anything Uncle Sam touches, it became a place where researching how to prevent disease turned into a place researching on how to weaponize it. Anyway, because they were dealing in animal biowarfare stuff and because it was pretty remote and not as sexy as Area 51, they just plugged away, coming up with combination after combination of DNA, RNA, chemicals, and more, all geared towards wiping out an enemy's animal food supply as quickly and as efficiently as possible. As Slaughter spoke, Zinn's perception of him started to drift. He no longer thought he was a lunatic as he first suspected. Slaughter was morphing into something more, a socially awkward but rational person with a story that, he had to admit, was captivating so far. He looked at Bill, and Bill just shrugged and took a sip of water. Now here's where it went off the rails, Slaughter continued. You ever hear of the Montauk Monster? Bill lit up, nearly spitting out his mouthful of water. Yeah, we had a mythology class and spent a week on cryptozoology, Bill said. It was a swollen, hairless dog or something that washed up on the beach, right? Yeah, I wrote my report on it, Zinn corroborated. Not quite, Slaughter said. There were many theories as to what it was. Dog, sheep, hell, even turtle. But they never were able to identify it for sure. The prevailing theory was it was a bloated raccoon carcass, which is a little closer to the truth, but not by much. Well, what was it, Zinn asked. That's the thing. There's no name for it because it never existed before. Let me back up a minute. See, the guys at Plum Island were doing bang-up work. And when you do bang-up work for the military, they always try to push you a bit further down the road. These guys figured out every way there was to kill an edible animal within seconds, so the brass asked them if they could do other things to the animals. So they reverse engineered their DNA to make them resistant to the nasty stuff they concocted in the first place. Vaccinations for our livestock. The brass was happy and asked them if they could do even more. Their funding went up, all in the black books, and they started cutting DNA apart and adding genes here and there. Like CRISPR's in asked, referring to current gene splicing techniques? No, said Slaughter. This was the mid-1980s, early 1990s we're talking about. The Montauk Monster didn't wash up until 2008. This was early on. Everything was way more primitive and way more expensive. In that time, they made stuff, but they were scientists, not soldiers. So they would throw ideas out and try to see what would stick. They would take already dangerous animals and add whatever features they thought would be badass enough to impress the generals. A porcupine with a scorpion tail, or a piranha that could shock you like an electric eel. The generals liked what they saw and they kept pushing. After years of trial and error, they finally decided that a raccoon would be the perfect base model for anything more that they wanted to create. Why trash pandas? Zinn asked, genuinely curious and completely enraptured with the story by this point. He'd always been a sucker for a good conspiracy theory, and even though he still regarded Slaughter, if that was his real name, as a savvy nutcase for the most part, he was enjoying the tale. For one, they're smart, resourceful. You can show them how to solve a puzzle and they remember it for years. They get into pretty much any place and they worked at night. They were a great starting block for what the generals wanted, but the generals always wanted more. So they amped up the program and it got a name, Project Aroughcoune, off the old Algonquin word for raccoon. The only curveball the brass threw at them is they wanted something big, and raccoons are, like 40 pounds or so at most. Breeding programs would take too long, even with 5 kits to a litter. So they went back to the labs. They had DNA from South American raccoon predecessors, the Chapalamania, from bones they found in the early 1900s. They were able to contrast the two to find out where on the helix the information for size was kept, and they played around with that until they were able to make giant raccoons. But the science wasn't perfect. Things didn't develop just to be bigger. They changed in other ways. One of them got out. Montauk Monster, Bill interrupted. Bingo, Slaughter said. And the media buzz around that creature quickly became the perfect smokescreen for Aroughcoune. The feds, men in black if you prefer, love when conspiracy theory stuff hits the newspapers, internet these days. The real Aroughcoune are much, much bigger, Slaughter said. Aroughcoune like bears, Bill asked. Aroughcoune like houses, Slaughter replied, correcting his pronunciation. Come on, Zinn blurted out, firmly putting Slaughter back in the loony list in his mind. Not McMansions, Slaughter walked back. More like, typical 1950s style suburban bungalows. Imagine a fat, hairy circus elephant, and you get the idea. I know it's hard to believe until you see it for yourself. You saw it? Zinn laughed. Hand to God, Slaughter said, raising his right hand to illustrate his sincerity. Where did you see it? Bill asked, still under the spell of the story. I followed it across New York State, Slaughter said. So if you're following it, why aren't the feds following it as well? And then they just go from there. And that's when the monster first makes its appearance and starts to strike. So that's it in a nutshell. Are there any questions at this point? No? Yeah. Right, right, and it's a great point. A lot of people have told me that this resonates with King Kong, Frankenstein, other creatures that never asked to be born, and Frankenstein is the epitome of monster horror for me. I mean, I love it. It's amazing. The book, the movies, Boris Karloff, the new one is phenomenal. Um, but yeah, that was me experimenting a little bit with my Stephen King background and Cujo. And I read Cujo way earlier than any mother should have let their son read Cujo. But my mom was a single mom. She did a good job, I hope. And she didn't always keep track of what I was reading. So I got my hands on a copy of Cujo. I was probably 11 or 12 at the time. And I remember scenes in that book where he put the dog's thoughts out there. And I thought, I could do this. And so, yeah, there's just a tiny little bit in the book of what the creature's view is. And it's really more than halfway in. It's already rabid. So its thoughts are really muddled. Rabies is more of a disease of hydrophobia than anything. And so it's extremely thirsty, but water repels it. And it's a really sad state for this animal to be in. And I wanted to get some of that out and across to the reader. And Stephen King himself always says, steal if you can. So I stole that little trick and used it, but I didn't go overboard with it. I don't think. I mean, I did have more that I wrote that I deleted because I thought it started to get cheesy at that point. But but yeah, it was that's how that came about. Yeah, thank you. Because it's not this creature's fault. You know, none of us asked to be born, and the lives we have are our own and unique to us. So this thing is living out its unique life, and it is what it is. And it's a shame that people made it. Yeah. You read a lot. Um, I mean, I can't tell you how many hundreds of books I've read over my lifetime, and you read diversity. And my background ranges from surrealist French poetry to um, horror, to Clive Barker, to Jack Ketchum, James Elroy. These are like heroes of mine that I read, and Tom Clancy, a lot of that stuff. And you kind of go through phases. But the writing part, I would say it's always come naturally, but I was the kid that they always gave the book reports to. We had group projects. They're like, here, you write it. So I was always writing. And when I was in high school, I won some poetry contests and stuff like that. So I never stopped. And then I went into newspaper writing and magazine writing, and that keeps the muscle toned. but you're not writing what you want to write about. So with the newspaper, it was something different every day, which kept me interested, but it wasn't what I wanted to write about. I wanted to do more stories on Dixmont, which I covered for the Trib for years. And my editors would be like, "No, we're tired of hearing about Dixmont. Go write something different." So, so I'd cover these different meetings and things, and you always write. Now it's to the point where I can just sit down when I feel like it and just write whatever. Now it's more difficult for me to plot in my head where it's going next than actually physically write it. So if I have the blueprint in my mind, I could write the afternoon away, you know. Um, and then once the whole thing is complete, like I said, I don't use an outline. When the whole work is done, I go back and I backfill it. I'll read it again, and then I'll backfill it with details. Things where like, okay, um, they need a bottle pull and spring here, to make it more realistic. They need something. You need to describe how cold it is outside. You need to put something in about the phase of the moon right here because they're outside and you haven't mentioned the moon yet. So you just kind of backfill those details in, for me at least, and that's how you do it. But to get into it, it's not hard. I mean, all the advice that you see out there, write every day, force yourself to write every day, and then it becomes muscle memory over time. And then, I mean, a lot of you know me. I'm not the most articulate, extroverted person on the street. My strength is in articulating myself through what I write. So it's surreal. it's, I mean, 10 years ago, if you had told me that you'd be known for a book about a giant raccoon, I'd be like, get away from me, but it works. And, I'm proud, excuse me, I'm proud that I was able to pull it off and take a crazy, crazy idea and distill it into something that was believable. And yeah, it's on the urban myth spectrum of believability, but you have Montauk Monster, you have Bigfoot, you have all these things that people. I'm well. I actually baby steps. I have a nice kid from Philadelphia who is reading it for an audiobook version. So that's the next step with this. Graphic novels, I thought would be a great fit for that. Movie, I don't know if anybody knows anybody that's a movie producer. I'll be happy to talk to them. But the sequel, where to pick up, it was just an idea. And I have a lot of ideas. I have a lot of Google Notes where over time I'll just think of something like something just ridiculous. Um, a throwaway one. I had an idea of like, what if you had a superhero made of nothing but copper? And it was just something I was playing with. And then I started thinking about the science of that. How would this guy manipulate the world around him? How would he um, keep the tarnish off of him? Or would he just let himself tarnish and get that nice green patina? And that would be how he looked. And you just start thinking of stuff. You indulge yourself in thought, and you let it take you where it goes, and no matter how ridiculous it is. And if you can bring it all back around and ground it, then yeah, it's going to work. The sequel to this, like I said, it's kind of supernatural, but Mingan and Bill come back, and there's a series of deaths in Pittsburgh that are really just bizarre. And it turns out that they found this, what's called a ghost mother, which is this almost like a fertility goddess type of statue. And it was created by this shaman, and he was working by himself, and it was kind of like black magic type of stuff, but he entrapped himself within it. and now he has to collect the souls to free himself. And his main goal is to take over the rest of the world. I mean, he's a Native American antagonist, and he's got a chip on his shoulder about colonization of his land. He's a Chickasaw, so that was down south in Georgia, and that area. They were fierce warriors, and he wants to basically flip the script and enslave this country and take it over. But he's getting stronger day by day, and um, so you have a lot of these graphic, violent deaths in this scene because he's angry. He's been trapped for all these years. The mechanism that they come to fight him with is science based, and it is going to be it's physics, it's theoretical physics, a lot of like Neil deGrasse Tyson stuff, a lot of Feynman stuff. So while you're writing these things, you're also pursuing sources that can help you in this. So now I've gone down this whole theoretical physics path, talking about block universe and nobody really understands quantum theory, but like understanding enough to just kind of get my heroes from A to B and let them spring this trap on this guy. It's all I need. So it's not like a deep dive into something where like Stephen Hawking would come back and say, "Oh, you're full of it." This is just enough to kind of fudge the math enough to get them over the hump. So there's a lot of that in there, and it's kind of, I would say it's my niche. Too soon to say that, but science and horror isn't it's not a lot out there. Like hard science, is not really out there. I mean, you have Frankenstein that does it, but most of the other horror novels you read, it's something supernatural or it's some insanely evil person doing something, magic, uh, or a continuation of vampires, werewolves, and other creatures that were already out there. So having that hard science in there is important to me, and it's just something that I'm hoping to take include in all my work. And it does get easier once you create the world. That's the hard part. So this was difficult. Um, Creating Algonquin State Park, creating Monique, creating Mingan. Now that I have them, I can pair up any of them and take them on a different adventure. So yeah, I hope that answered in my long-winded way. Anybody else? Okay. Well, I appreciate everybody coming out. If you're interested, we have copies here. If you're not interested, that's great too. Um, but I appreciate you taking the time to actually spend an evening here and listen to me blather for an hour. Thank you.